Welcome, everyone, to the Daily Fix Show on Fantasy and Frames, where me, Keith Fleming, and my boy Joe the Brain Mats talk about our favorite DraftKings plays, 4,500 and lower. We give our favorite prop bets for the week. If you have questions, obviously hit us up in the comments. But real quickly, Joe, before we get into the plays at 4,500 and below, I just think I need to bring this up because we talked about this on our show last night. There is 3 QBs this week on DraftKings, 5K and below, that I feel have great matchups, extreme upside, and just the different lineups you can throw together and players you can put in them by going with some of them, i.e. Tyrod Taylor and Darius Slayton for 8K. Even Mason Rudolph, if you pair him with Deontay Johnson or George Pickens, again, you're talking, right at $10,000. And then Jared Stidham, there's a bunch of different directions to go. But even if you pair him with Judy, it looks like Sutton's out. Again, you're talking about right around 10K. It's just very rare that you have those kind of options in that price range.
Yeah, absolutely. And reasonable options. We've seen Tyrod Taylor play before. He's not an incompetent player. He's in an advantageous matchup because probably going to have to pass. Rams aren't a great defense anyway. And then, the other two get to face off against the Chargers defense that's been awful all season, a Broncos defense that's had wild variations in how good it's been. So, I think they're very reasonable plays. I even think probably more so Tyrod, just because I trust him a little bit more. Even in a cash game, if you want to, just because of what it allows you to do to stack up expensive guys at other spots, I don't think it's a crazy thing to do in that.
I don't either. All right, let's hit the intro and we'll get into this thing because me and Joe both love this song. It's a banger.
Absolutely.
What's up again, everyone? This is the Daily Fix Fantasy and Frames DFS show, hosted by your boy Keith Fleming and my boy Joe the Brain Mats, trying to help you by giving you our favorite plays 4,500 and below on DraftKings. Then we do some plus odd prop bets, have some fun. We may talk some showdown lineups, but we're going to start with those plays 4,500 and below. And once again, Joe, moving up in the world, we got another graphic. What a time to be alive, Joe.
I love it.
I do too. Absolutely love it. All right, 4,500 and below. Very interesting this week. I actually think you could talk me into about 10 or 12 plays that I like. I'm going to keep it simple with the first couple and not overthink it. Normally, I try to go cheap. And if it's under 4,500, obviously it's cheap, but, a little lower than the highest we can take. But Darren Waller at 4,500 just seems like low-hanging fruit to me. I know he's only scored 13.2 points in his 2 games back from IR on DraftKings, but volume is king, as Dave Eddy always says. And he's seen 5 or more targets in both of the games since he's returned from IR. I think that's honestly his floor for targets, especially in a game that, we think the Giants are going to be down. The Rams are going to be moving the ball. If you listened to our show yesterday, we like almost every Ram there is. And this is a game that, Waller had his best game with Tyrod Taylor versus yet another defense that really struggles with tight ends, much like the Los Angeles Rams. When they played Washington, Taylor played the entire game. He had 8 targets, caught 7 passes, 96 yards, and a touchdown. I would not be shocked by that line at all. And I just think that I like Slayton. I talked about him. I'm going to talk about him on this show. And I love playing Tyrod Taylor in cash. But the more I think about it, I almost think Darren Waller at 4,500 is actually the most reasonable stack with him, because you might as well spend a little extra. You're saving so much on going with Tyrod. And I just think Waller is the safest play of all of them, but we've also seen he has the ability to have a 20-point game with Tyrod Taylor as his QB.
Yeah, I'm glad you went with this one because I did not have it on my list, but it's one I thought about talking about on our pod yesterday. It was one I thought about talking about today because, yeah, I mean, the 2 games he plays with Tyrod, he gets 15 targets. And like you said, his one real explosive game was with Tyrod. So the fact that he's 4,500, again, a bottom 5 defense against tight ends in what presumably will be forced into a pass-heavy game script, we're thinking, yeah, I love that play. It's like I said last night on the other pod. I'm just playing this guy all the time because he stays in this under 4,500 thing. I think he's had one game all year where he was over 4,500, and he scored 14.4 in that one. So it's Demario Douglas, 4,300 against the Buffalo Bills. Again, 4 of his last 5 games, he's had over 10 points on DK. For those 4 games, at least 7 targets. In fact, every game he's played since week 8, granted he did miss a few weeks of injury, he has had 7 targets except for 1. That was against Kansas City. L'Jarius Sneed loves to shadow people. Buffalo's not shadowing anybody with their banged up secondary. You should feel good about Demario. And again, guy has not caught touchdown pass all season. 4 out of 5 games, double-digit points, and he hasn't caught a touchdown. So if we get the touchdown, 20 points is right there. It's not even something where you're like, he's got to have this and that. It's just literally the one thing, and he could have a 20-point game, and the guy cost us 4,300. So Demario Douglas, until probably he's going to be one of my plays. Well, I guess we only have one more week that we can pick Demario Douglas because that's not going to be a playoff team. But if he catches the touchdown this week, I'm betting next week I will not be able to play him because he'll bump up over. And if he doesn't, he'll probably give us 13-14 again, and I'll play him one last time in week 18.
Yeah, I love the consistency of that guy. It just feels like at his price, I mean, in cash, he's going to get 10 to 12 points if he's on the field.
His target rate this season is 26.8%.
Yes.
That's 14th in the NFL.
Yep.
So
it's insane. And again, this offense has been a lot better with Billy Zappi. Not saying it's great, but it has been better with Billy Zappi than it was with Mac Jones. So a lot of good points there. Give me OBJ for my second player, 4,500 or lower. If you watched the show yesterday, you know how high I am on Zay Flowers. I think he is a really good play, and probably I like him more, even being about 1,000 more than OBJ. But if you don't have the money for Flowers, I think OBJ has real upside. To have kind of a big day. We saw the Ravens lost Keaton Mitchell, and it's going to lead to them throwing more. It just is. It was proven last week. Zay Flowers saw a record number of targets, tied his record number of receptions. Lamar had 35 pass attempts in a game that they were up double figures almost the entire second half. That was the 3rd most pass attempts he's had all season. And again, this was a game that they were controlling. I just think it shows they are going to open it up more with the pass and kind of, I think, let the pass then hopefully lead to them being able to run the ball. And I mean, OBJ, he has not, been great the last 2 weeks. He is not. There's no denying that. But he's had at least 3 targets in 10 of 11 games. So he's going to get a few shots at it. He's averaging almost 6 targets per game in that span over 11 games. And he scored 11 points or more on DK in 4 of his last 7, scoring 3 touchdowns. And he's had 2 games this year where he scored 19 points or more. And finally, just Miami is a really good run defense. Like they are. I mean, across the board, no matter what metric, fantasy, DVOA, all the way across, Miami is a good run defense, meaning the Ravens are going to need to throw more to beat them. And they definitely are a little susceptible to the pass. And I can just see OBJ, having one of those OBJ games where it's 3 catches, 56 yards, and a touchdown. And at 4,500, man, you're golden in a cash game.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, not the best couple of weeks, but it's OBJ at a cheap price in a good matchup, and so I'm never against that. And for all the he's not the OBJ he was, we've seen him be productive this season. So I would not be shocked at all if that comes through, because I mean someone on that Ravens team is going to have a really good game.
Yeah.
So love it at the price point. I'm going to go back to a guy that we were targeting earlier in the season. That's Greg Dortch, 4,200 against the Philadelphia Eagles. I mean, Dortch, double digits in 3 of his last 5 games. That was, last week that was catching 2 passes for 45 yards and a touchdown. So again, you're in this price range. It can go either way. He's, the 2 previous weeks, 3 targets apiece. But Marquise Brown is now on IR. So it's going to be Dortch, Rondale Moore, and Michael Wilson out there against, the Philadelphia Eagles, who are giving up more points to wide receivers than anyone else. Specifically to slot receivers. That's Dortch and that's Rondale Moore right there, alternating in the slot. No one's given up more points than the Eagles there. And then the Eagles have given up a touchdown. Let's see, they've been good on limiting touchdowns in man defense. Now, for this Cardinals group, but the Eagles normally play they're 75-25 zone man, which is about average. I wouldn't be surprised if, depending on how healthy they are in the backfield, because their corner has been banged up, if they try to go a little bit more man against a Cardinals team that doesn't have a lot of guys who are beating you in man, especially with Marquise Brown out. Like Michael Wilson, per PFF's charting, 68 routes run for 4 yards against man. Rondale Moore, 87 routes run for 44 receiving yards. So if I'm the Eagles, I'm going to run more man defense to try to shut this down. Greg Dortch against man, 37 routes run for 94 yards. So he's
also think that's a Pro McBride stat, right?
Yes, it is 100% a Pro McBride stat, who will obviously not be one of our plays because he's almost $6,000 now. But yeah,
I still think he should be in every lineup. Yeah,
100%. But if I'm rolling the dice on a Cardinals receiver, I'm going to go with a guy who is going to play a decent amount in the slot, because again, worst team against the slot receiver. I'm going to go against a guy that is not going to be completely incompetent whenever the other team is in man defense. And a guy that we've seen be productive. Again, 3 of the last 5, double digits. So
it's not just 3 of the last 5. I mean, when he sees, I think it's 6 or more targets, his numbers are unbelievable. And there's a good chance he's going to see that in a game that you expect the Cardinals to be down and they're without Marquise Brown.
Yeah. Exactly.
So I love it.
So, yeah, of all the guys on their team, because all those guys, all the receivers are super cheap. Dortch is the one that I would be trusting this week.
All right. Again, this is going to be a risky one. I'll go ahead and tell you this is an MME play, but we rarely get to have running backs because, it's just unfortunately the way it's set up. It's basically tight ends and wide receivers. I'm going to take Jaleel McCollum from the Denver Broncos, 4,400. Again, I rarely put any running backs on this list, but with a new QB, I can see 2 things. One is that they try to lean on the run a little bit more, which could mean he gets, 6 to 10 carries. And 2, with these quarterbacks in their first starts, they do a lot of check down, right? Like they don't want to make big mistakes in their kind of first action. And that's going to mean potential, opportunities in the passing game for the running backs and tight ends and the guys near the line of scrimmage. Last week, he had 11 touches versus the Patriots. He's had multiple receptions in 4 of his last 5 and 4 more carries in 3 of his last 4. So he is seeing, 8 to 10 touches. And I know it's been a while since we've had, the guy that was scoring touchdowns because he's gone through a pretty rough stretch. But earlier this season, he scored in 3 straight games. So he does have that ability. And the Chargers defense is garbage. And they've really struggled with running backs catching passes. So, I mean, obviously this could be a Perrine, pick instead. Obviously he wouldn't fall into the category, but I really do like McLaughlin. He seems to make the more big plays than even Perrine, and he could, maybe turn 4 or 5 targets into 30 yards and a touchdown. And at this price, you're golden, especially if he's going to get 4 or 5 rush attempts.
Yeah, I mean, from what little I have seen of him this year, he seems like a productive back. Like there's talent there. So I mean, that's one of the places I think you can really find value at the end of seasons is finding those guys who haven't had a ton of play this year, who are on bad teams, or in the Broncos case, a mediocre team that's their season is over effectively.
And they've already made one big change, right? So why not then?
And because those guys pop off every year, where you get the guy who has 25 carries and then he has 25 carries in a game. And suddenly that guy, you lose a fantasy football championship because someone picked him up. So, hopefully in DFS we can find those guys and win ourselves some money. My next guy, I'm going to stay right in that same range at wide receiver. Curtis Samuel, 4,400 against the San Francisco 49ers. Coming off a pretty brutal game, 1 reception on 6 targets for 16 yards against the New York Jets. Of course, the New York Jets have maybe the best secondary in football.
When they're not facing Joe Flacco.
That's true. When they're not facing Joe Flacco. Although I will say the corners are so great. Obviously, there's a little more to attack if you have a good tight end, which is exactly what Joe Flacco did last night.
Man, let's not forget, though, Elijah Moore also had 40 yards and a touchdown in like 2 quarters. So,
I mean, I do wonder a little bit. Obviously, the Jets, again, played well last week when Sam Howell was out there. And then when Jacoby Brissett came in, things started to change. I think they might be in that the Broncos defense from last year kind of part of their season where it's like, you're just so exhausted of the offense being terrible that you don't quite have the same intensity that you had earlier.
And that's why it makes so much sense that they just re-signed the coach and GM. I mean, good moves, Jets.
I mean, as long as they don't re-sign every single one of Aaron Rodgers' best friends again, let's move on from that, Jets. But anyway, Curtis Samuel, listen, tough matchup. 49ers are a good defense, but this is a guy who, in his 3 previous games prior to last week, double-digit points, 2 20-point games, last 4 weeks, even counting last week because he had the 6 targets, 32 targets over the last month. So he has been productive, and I'm buying this offense with Jacoby Brissett. Now, obviously, I think they're going to get creamed in this game. I think San Francisco might put up 40. Maybe that should be one of my plays on the bets. Is just whatever it is, San Francisco to score 40, because this is the worst defense in the NFL, and San Francisco is obviously going to be wanting to get out some frustration after last week. But the point is, Curtis Samuel is once again Washington going to be a very pass-heavy game script because they're going to be losing. Eric Bieniemy's already shown that he likes to call pass-heavy game scripts to begin with. And I think Jacoby Brissett is a lot better than Sam Howell. I am not a Sam Howell believer. We've been happy to play Sam Howell and guys on the team at times because of the pass-heavy game script, but we've seen the last 2 weeks. Jacoby Brissett comes in, and suddenly it's like, is this a really good offense? So Curtis Samuel, a guy who has been productive when the offense is moving, 7 double-digit games on the season, 4 over 18 points. So a guy who can give you real production, and I'm buying Brissett. So let's roll it.
Yeah, I like that. I also love that if you look at Samuel, he seems to go off against teams with good pass rush. You look at like the Cowboys game, and the Niners definitely fall into that category that they're going to be getting to the QB quick, and Samuel's a lot of times that kind of underneath route. And then
again, I trust Brissett to get the ball out quicker than I would Sam Howell, who obviously has been very prone to taking sacks. So that's another reason I'm even higher on Samuel than I would be if Sam Howell was there.
Very good point. All right, the last two that I have, both of these guys I actually will be using in cash this week for sure. The first is Cedric Wilson, Miami Dolphins, 3,600. Last week, caught 3 of 5 targets, 42 yards versus the Cowboys. That was his most receiving yards since week 7, and all of it came in the second half because Jalen Waddle got knocked out of the game. And Tyreek's battling an ankle issue. They've already basically said that Waddle is out for this game as well. And I think the Dolphins are going to need to throw to beat this Ravens team. Again, I think the Ravens are good enough and smart enough defense that they're going to know Miami is going to want to run the ball. And that's what they're going to try to take away. And then, Tua is going to have to make plays. And the combination of just Hill being less than 100% and the fact that how much Wilson, got targeted in that second half, all 5 of those targets in the second half after Waddle was injured, I think he's a real value this week and has extreme upside, especially if the game goes away. I think it is because I think it's going to be tough for Miami to win in Baltimore. I think Baltimore's offense is humming. And if this is a game where, say, they get down, who knows, they don't rest Tyreek, right? And then Cedric Wilson's basically the number 1 receiver out there for late minutes. Or just they get down big and they're throwing the entire second half. And even with Hill out there, he's going to see significant numbers against a defense that you can't throw on.
Yeah, I think that's a really good call about how you would expect Baltimore to come into this game defensively. Because I think you're right. If I'm scheming up a defense and I have the capability to do it, which Baltimore has as much adaptability on defense as anyone. Yeah, I'm up against Miami. I'm trying to take away the run and force Tua to beat me, which I do love that we just keep having games where Baltimore plays and it's like, what should they do? Force the supposed MVP candidate to beat them. So, take that for what you will. But, yeah, I like that thought process a lot. I'm going to go, it's the obvious one, Gerald Everett, 3,500 against the Denver Broncos. Everett, 5 straight games with at least 8 points, which, if he gives us 8 points at 3,500, I'm not going to complain. One thing I really love, besides the matchup, which, hey, Denver absolutely atrocious against tight ends this season. Targets, they're actually out, just barely outside the bottom 5, so God bless them for that. But they are 28th in receptions allowed, 31st in yards, dead last in touchdowns, giving up 2 more touchdowns than anyone else this season to tight ends. Really, what I love about it, 7 touchdowns allowed to tight ends in their last 7 games. Only 2 other teams have given up 7 touchdowns all season to tight ends.
Wow.
And they've given up 7 in the last 7. Only 2 games have they not given up a touchdown. One of those was actually against the Los Angeles Chargers. And again, still put up a very reasonable 8.9 points in that game. So if we get a touchdown, now we're talking 15 plus. Also, Easton Stick has started the last 2 games. He came in and threw 24 passes in that Denver game, week 14. Prior to Easton Stick coming in, Gerald Everett had not had more than 6 targets in a game this season. He has now had 3 straight games with 8 targets. He's up to 11th in target rate among tight ends. He's top 10 in red zone targets on the season. So, yeah, I think he's, in regular fantasy, we'd be talking about him as, I think, a borderline
tight end 1,
number 1 tight end in an average matchup. Against Denver, I think he's a surefire guy that I'm banking on him being a top 10 tight end this week. He only costs us 3,500. So he is going to be – I'm going to have him in probably a lot of lineups with McBride. Because like you said, I want McBride across the board. But if I want to save a little bit of money, I might do that combo. That's 9,400 for 2 tight ends. And I would say McBride, like we talked about yesterday, I'm taking him over any wide receiver under 6,000. So
I mean, it's 15
I love
targets
that
for
combo.
those two guys per game for like a last month.
Yeah.
Man, you take that for that price. Really like that play. And again, I just love McBride. If you just look at him as a wide receiver, 9 targets a game now his last 7, 420 plus point games. It's a great matchup. Like, just don't overthink it. Let other people make the mistake of not playing them. Real quickly before I get to my last one, I do want to mention Brandon Johnson for the Denver Broncos. He's 3,300. It's looking like Sutton's not going to play. If he does not, this kid's had some really good flashes. I know we talk about Marvin Mims, but last week, most of it after the Sutton concussion, 3 of 5 targets, 47 yards, and a touchdown. He's somebody that in 11 appearances this season, 11 catches, 169 yards, the big thing, 4 touchdowns. So, I mean, that's a touchdown basically 1 out of every 3 games. And he played by far the second most offensive snaps at wide receiver with Sutton going out. So if you're telling me you're getting the number 2 receiving option with Jarrett Stidham, and I think he's probably actually more in tune with Jarrett Stidham because he hasn't been taking a lot of snaps with the first team. He's probably been taking a lot of snaps with Jarrett Stidham. I just think there's some real potential for that to be a super sneaky big play because he's had some monster games. Had a 20-point game earlier this year, and he's just scored 15.7 points last week. So not too shabby, but the official play, Darius Slayton, 3,400. I mentioned it. Tyrod Taylor, Slayton for 8K. I think there's as much upside as I can remember in a pair for that price because we saw last week on one play, they hooked up for a 75-yard passing touchdown. And he is, Slayton is a good receiver, and Taylor is arguably the best quarterback the Giants have. So that's good for both guys. And they're seriously underpriced. I mean, Slayton, 3 double-digit games in his last 5. He's hit 5.5 times his salary twice in those 5 games. And now that it's official Taylor's going to play, I think it's a smash play. I expect the Giants to be down. I expect them to be throwing. And I think that's really good for Slayton. And, we talked about a little bit with Tyrod Taylor, and I'll get to it in the props, but he's also able to run. Like, teams have had a lot of success running against the Los Angeles Rams if you're one of these, dual threat quarterbacks. And sometimes when that happens, the defense starts sneaking up, and the next thing you know, he throws one over the top. Slayton's really good at that. I think it's a home run play.
Well, and along those same lines, I've got Jalen Hyatt as my final guy at 3,200 against the Rams. Very similar thought process where it's just the deep ball is going to be more open with Tyrod at quarterback than it was with DeVito, who really only threw downfield against Washington, who, again, worst defense in the NFL. In the 2 games that Tyrod started, Slayton, Wan'Dale Robinson, and Jalen Hyatt, all between 8 and 10 targets, all between 84 to 96 yards. 2 of Hyatt's 4 games this season where he's had 4 or more targets were the 2 games with Tyrod. On the season, an ADOT of 21.6 yards. That is the highest in the NFL. He has 34 targets on the season. 16 of them are deep targets. So roughly, he's literally 1 pass away from being half. So yeah, Jalen Hyatt is just running deep, running fast, and he just needs someone to find him. As someone who watches every Giants game, he's open at least once or twice a game for a potential 75-yard touchdown. And it doesn't get hit because the quarterback's not looking that way. The quarterback is being hit. And obviously there's always going to be the risk of the latter with this Giants team and this offensive line. But again, Tyrod has been better about throwing deep. He's been better about avoiding sacks than anyone else who has played quarterback for the Giants this season. So yeah, to me, take your pick. Slayton, Hyatt, either one, at least one of these guys is going to catch a big play. Will it be a 75-yard touchdown? Probably not, but we can hope. And there's always a chance you hit two because, again, he only played one half last week. So, yeah, I think at least one of these guys is going to have a pretty good game at an incredibly low price. And there's a chance that it could even be both. So, yeah, I love the Giants this week. I obviously love the Rams even more because I think they're going to win by like 14. But, yeah, fire these guys up.
Yeah, for those that don't know, we were talking about yesterday. For MME, you could go a Hyatt, Slayton, Taylor stack for $11K and would have $39,000 for the rest of your lineup. So if you want to have CMC, Kieran Williams, yeah,
he scores 3 touchdowns.
I mean, you could have anybody you want. There is, again, I think just more combinations you can make with some of these QB options, 5K or below, than I remember in a long time. All right, let's move on to the prop bets. And I'm going to start with CMC, who, I mean, I kind of wonder what the Niners were doing. Seemed like they didn't really want to just let it be the CMC show while the game was, close. I think Purdy had thrown, 3 picks, and they were only down 3 points. It's like, how about we just run the ball? And they didn't really do that. But luckily, it's a very easy opponent this week. Washington is, arguably the worst defense in the league. And that's why I'm giddy that my alt receiving line, 50-plus yards, is plus 265. Now, on the, full discretion, there's concerns for this bet. He hadn't hit this number but once in his last 7. So that's not good. But he did hit it 3 times in 5 weeks before that 7-game stretch. Washington allows over 7 targets per game to opposing running backs, almost 5.5 receptions. And there have been plenty of backs who have had big days receiving the ball versus this defense. Saquon Barkley in 2 games had 106 yards and 2 touchdowns. Kenneth Walker had 64 yards and a touchdown. Ramondre Stevenson had 42 yards receiving. Curtis Gainwell and Devin Achane both had 30 yards receiving. And then last week, Breece Hall had 12 catches for 96 yards. And CMC is just one of those guys that it doesn't really take more than 2-3 receptions. And it's not hard to see him getting to that 50-plus number. And to get plus 265 again versus one of the worst defenses in the league, not only versus running backs, but also versus running backs catching passes out of the backfield. I think he's going to get to that number. And I also think that now that Purdy's MVP discussion is over, I do believe that they're going to try to make CMC look good and try to make a real case for him to win the MVP. I think all those things make this bet, a pretty considerably, like I feel pretty confident about it, even though it's, plus 265 odds, because obviously it's a number you hadn't hit in recent weeks.
Yeah, in that matchup, go to town. I just said, give me Kyren Williams against my New York Giants. Now, sadly, the Vegas is also aware that Kyren Williams is going to have a great game against the New York Giants, who are 30th in rushing yards allowed. They've given up over 100-yard rushings to opposing backfields in 5 of the last 7 games. I say, let's get aggressive. Let's go 120 rushing yards, and let's same game parlay it, because if he's getting 120 rushing yards, he's scoring a touchdown. That gets us to plus 276 for Kyren Williams.
Ooh.
Again, the receiving is harder to guess in this one. The Giants play a lot of man. Generally, the Rams have struggled more against that, although they just torched New Orleans, who also runs a lot of man. So I think the way they're playing, they're going to do whatever they want in this game. But I also think they're going to be winning this game pretty much the whole way. So that to me signals a lot of Kyren Williams. You can also, if you want, Kyren Williams, reasonable guy out of the backfield receiving as well. So if you want to switch it over to the rushing plus receiving and throw in a touchdown, you can do that too. But I'll roll the dice that he just absolutely gashes us in the run game. Dexter Lawrence has also been banged up recently. He has not been playing his normal allotment of snaps. And when Dexter Lawrence is not out there, it just becomes so much easier to run against this defensive line. So, yeah, 120 yards rushing and a score at plus 276 for Kyren Williams.
Well, I think he's rushed for 100 yards in like 4 of his last 5.
Yeah,
so
he's on a roll, and the Giants do not seem like the defense that will.
He is discount CMC right now because it's the same kind of numbers. He seems to score every game, and he just always seems to score 20-plus points. So, the next prop, let's go race to 20 rushing yards. Man, what a world we live in. Yes, you can gamble on a game and the player fastest to 20 rushing yards. This is a long shot. I understand that, but that's why we're getting 7-1 odds. And I'm looking at the Giants-Rams game, and I'm going with Tyrod Taylor. Taylor has at least 20 rushing yards in his last 5 games that he's played for the Giants. No matter how many snaps he took, he rushed for at least 20 yards. And one of the big reasons that I like Taylor for cash this week is the Rams' issues with running backs. Anthony Richardson, 50 yards and a touchdown. Jalen Hurts, 70 yards and a touchdown. Joshua Dobbs, 47 yards. Lamar Jackson, 70 yards. Who is to say that Tyrod can't have a carry, especially if the Giants get the ball on their first drive or second drive, where he sees an opening and gets that 20 yards right there? At 7-1 odds, I don't hate it because I know he's going to run. Like, I absolutely know he is. And he has a single carry of 15 yards or more in 3 of his last 6 games. 2 of those games, he's had a 20-yard rush. So it is possible. I mean, obviously, you got to get it in the first drive, second at the absolute latest for it to hit. But I do like the 7-1 deal, especially with the struggles that the Rams have with these running QBs.
I like that. I thought you were just going to give us a Tyrod, just like regular rushing yards one, which whatever that is at, I assume is also a pretty good play. But I love the 7-1 there. Gerald Everett, I was looking through what are the different things we can get. The payout's not really good on his receiving yards until you go 60, 70 yards. And he is not top 50 yards in the game this season. So I'm going to keep it simple. Gerald Everett, anytime touchdown, plus 280. Again, 7 touchdowns to tight ends in the last 7 games. Only 2 other teams have given up that many all season. So obviously there is always the chance that Donald Parham is going to vulture a touchdown for my guy Gerald Everett here, because that has definitely happened this season before. But at plus 280 in this matchup for a guy who's seeing 8 targets a game with Easton Stick, I'm going to let it ride.
Do you know what was Parham's odds?
Let me see if they have him listed. I would hope that they do.
Because if they have him listed,
he's 950 plus 950.
I like both of those.
So yeah, feel free to roll the dice on that. I mean, bet both, and as long as one of them scores, you will make money. So yeah, you know what? I like that play. There's our true play for that game.
I love it. All right. I talked about Cedric Wilson earlier. Alt receiving line 40 plus 115. Or if you're feeling frisky, you can do 50 plus 195. There have been 3 games this season where Jalen Waddle had a snap rate under 55%. Obviously, Waddle's going to play 0% of the snaps this week because he's not playing. And it's going to leave a bigger role for Cedric Wilson because in the 3 games that Waddle has played 55% of the snaps or less, Wilson, 12 targets, 9 receptions, 42 yards receiving or more in all 3 games. So I'm getting plus 115 to get a number he's hit all 3 times this has occurred. And I'm getting plus 195 for him to hit it. He's hit 50 twice, and then that 42-yard number. I feel really good about this bet. Like, I trust in the fact that the Ravens are too smart. Like, Waddle is out. What do you think that means? They are going to be trying to double and triple Tyreek Hill and obviously sell out on the run. And if you're any other Miami pass catcher, you're going to have some opportunities to make some plays because they're going to give you space. So I love that. Again, the 40 plus is the official bet at plus 115, but I do really like the 50 plus yards at plus 195 as well.
You're all over this Dolphins Ravens game. I love it. I'm going to go Chris Olave, over 110 receiving yards against the Tampa Bay Bucks. For one, the Bucks per FTN Fantasy, 29th in yards given up on average to number 1 wide receivers at 87 per game. So again, we're just on average, Bucks are giving up 87. So we're already getting close to the 110. Olave's topped 110 yards in 3 of his last 4 games. Okay. So he's already hitting it. He's in an advantageous matchup. It's a top 5 matchup, wide receiver versus corner matchup per PFF. Tampa Bay's offense has been on a roll. I think there's a good chance that they will put New Orleans into a pass-heavy game script, in which case, we can already not check the box that Olave is getting 8 or 9 targets. That's the guarantee. The hope is this plays out like last week's game against the Rams. The Rams score 30 points. Olave sees 13 targets. And we're clearing that 110 with room to spare. So over 110 plus 350. Again, 110 yards is something he's hit 3 of the last 4 games. And this is a bottom 5 defense against number 1 wide receivers.
And then you tell me he had a top 5 PFF wide receiver corner matchup?
Yeah, because the corners have not been great for Tampa Bay, and they've been hurt. I have not double-checked to see if they have both of their starting corners this week. Both guys, I think Carlton Davis is out, who's their number 2 corner usually, but I don't know that they've been shadowing with Jamel Dean anyway. So, yeah, they're out 1 starting corner, and Jamel Dean has not played to his normal ability that we've seen the last few years. So there's no reason to fade Olave now.
I love it. Again, one of our favorite plays from the show last night. Great call by you. The 4th one, Demarcus Robinson, who the more that this week goes on, if he would have been $100 cheaper, he would have been discussed about at length on this show. Alt receiving yards 50 plus 240. If you're feeling frisky, and I kind of am, 60 plus 390. I love him this week for cash. He has a touchdown in 4 straight games, 13.7 points or more in each of those games. And it's not really that difficult to figure out the success that he's having. Like when you have 3 superstars in Puka, Kupp, and Kyron Williams, what are defenses going to do? They're going to try to take away those guys first. And if you're a good player, like Demarcus Robinson appears to be, that gives you a lot of opportunity and a pretty big like piece of the pie to kind of carve out. And that's what's happening. And I was completely sold on this, and this is why I love Joe Matz. He always brings up the wide receiver corner matchups. Demarcus Robinson was top 5 in that excellent matchup of the corner that will be facing him most often in that game. The other guys on that list are Olave, Nico Collins, Justin Jefferson, and Puka. I think he has a monster game. Like, I think this could actually be his biggest game, especially if the Giants start bringing pressure and you get him, one-on-one with a corner that can't cover him, which I think is going to happen at times. I expect him to easily get that 50 number, and it wouldn't surprise me if he gets to 60 either. And I also think he's going to score a 5th straight touchdown.
Yeah, that was one of those ones where I was not even thinking about it. And then, yeah, you brought it up yesterday, and I was like, oh, yeah, that's right. He's up there at the top of the list with all the best receivers in the NFL for how good his matchup is. So I like that a lot. I'm going to go Noah Brown for the Texans against the Titans. 70-plus yards gets us plus 320. Again, a team, Titans, awful against the pass this season. Well, that's actually almost every season. The main difference is their run defense is also starting to give up. But 25th in DVOA against the pass. Only the Saints give up more yards to number 2 wide receivers for FTN Fantasy. So that's 58.3 yards. So again, we're already, what was that? Doing the math in my head. I don't know, over 80% of the way there to our 70. If you want to play it safer at the 60, that's plus 205. And that's basically the average that they're giving up to number 2 wide receivers. But I'm willing to be a little more bold, go for the 70 because CJ Stroud is back. We've seen what this pass offense can do when Stroud is out there. We've especially seen what can happen when you remove one of Tank Dell or Nico Collins and let Noah Brown cook. I mean, this is a guy who's had absolutely humongous games this season. Again, back in November, 150 yards in a score, 170 yards in back-to-back weeks. Against Tennessee, granted that game did go over overtime, so a little bit extra snaps. 8 receptions and 11 targets, 82 yards and a touchdown. So again, we're asking him to get 12 yards less than he got 2 weeks ago without CJ Stroud. So yeah, Noah Brown, 70 yards plus 320.
I love it. CJ Stroud was one of my favorite plays this week. So much so, I'm going to take the other wide receiver for the Houston Texans. It's my other, and it is Nico Collins, alt receiving line, 100-plus yards, plus 425. Or if you want to go safe, and I understand it, 80-plus at plus 195. It's all about Collins at home and Collins on the road. And really Stroud as well. It's shocking to see the game splits between the 7 home games and then their road games played. In road games this season, Collins has 16 receptions, 3.2 per, 276 yards, that's 55 yards per game, an average of 7.12 DK points. And home games, 48 receptions, that's nearly 7 per, 118 yards per game. He has hit the number that we are looking at 3 of 7 times this season in home games. And finally, in the last 2 home games, with Stroud playing and without Tank Dell, Collins, 21 targets, 16 receptions, 295 yards, went over the 100-yard total in both. Collins is like my favorite play at wide receiver this week. I think he's due to have a monster game. I think Stroud's going to go out and put on a show. I can't tell if it's wise to spend the money to stack Stroud and Collins, but I'm going to have a very hard time not having Collins in my lineup. And I think with what Joe's made with Brown, the smart play would be if you're going to play Stroud, put him with Brown to save the money. And then that way, because I really think you need to have CMC this week. I really think you need to have McBride and Cash. But I love the Texans. I just think that the only concern is obviously the 2 concussions. But I just think Stroud's that dude. I think he's going to come out and ball and burn a defense that really struggles with accurate deep ball throwers, which is what Stroud is.
Yeah, I was going to say, the play really might, just bet on Stroud. Because whether it's Brown, whether it's Collins, whether it's Dalton Schultz, who granted Tennessee is good usually against tight ends, I'm all in on Stroud having a big game this week because, I don't believe in that Titans defense, especially against the pass. I will go with another running back for my last play here against a soft run defense. As DeAndre Swift 100 rushing yards, plus 295 against the Arizona Cardinals. Per PFF, the run blocking offensive line versus run defense. Biggest advantage of the week, Philadelphia Eagles against the Arizona Cardinals. FTN Fantasy got the Cardinals 31st in DVOA against the run, 32nd in adjusted line yards against the run. This defense is horrific. They have given up over 110 yards rushing to opposing backfields in 6 straight games. They have gone 10 straight games, giving up at least 90 yards in the ground. I mean, they are as giving as it gets against the run. I mean, their 2 best games against the run, 75 yards, 68 yards. That's weeks 1 and 2. They have given up at least 86 yards every game since. A bunch of 100-yard games. I think this is Swift's 3rd 100-yard game of the season on the ground. So lock it in at plus 295.
Just remind him, Joe, Khalil Herbert gashed this defense last week.
Yeah.
So
absolutely did. I mean, yeah, if you need to get your run game right, and to be fair, the Eagles don't actually need that. Swift's been fine the last few weeks. But if you need to, the Cardinals are the team to play because they will set you right.
They do want to get it going, though. You know, I mean, like
they do want a little more consistency. I think. I think that was. I mean, they had it against the Giants. I think they really that Giants game was, if you watch it, fluky game that they should have been able to just pound us into submission in, but they fumbled the opening kickoff of the second half, and then there's a pick six when Goddard slipped. So, yeah, I think the Eagles are trying to get things right. They're going to want to destroy the Cardinals, and the Cardinals defense does not put up a lot of opposition. Also, again, Cardinals head coach, defensive coordinator for the Eagles last year. They're going to know exactly what this defense is because it's not a defense that changed. This is not like the Ravens where you're going to see something way different week to week. This is the same defense every week, and it's one the Eagles know well, and I expect them to exploit it.
Cool, Leo. All right. Well, we got to the end of that. We're going to skip the showdown this week because we went for about 55 minutes. I know we got some other shows coming up tonight. You can always hit me or Joe up on social media, any DFS questions. I don't want to say 100% that we will respond, but like 99% of the time we will respond. You can ask. There's some people that reach out to us. I tell them I don't know if they're sure what they're doing, but we will happily give you the advice. And I hope everybody has a very profitable weekend.
Yes.
And just do not forget that I know fantasy season is winding down, and that's depressing. So is the NFL season. But your regular fantasy leagues are done. We're not. We're going to be doing content. We'll be doing content. Next week, we'll be doing lineups for the wild card rounds, the divisional rounds, the conference championships, all the Super Bowl. You can't get
everything except the Pro Bowl.
We're like cockroaches. We just keep coming. So thanks to Jorge and all Fantasy and Frames for letting us do this on here. But for at Keith Fleming and at Joe E. Mats, aka Joe the Brain Mats, this has been the Daily Fix Show on Fantasy and Frames. Peace.